Here. So I'm going to go quickly through the first set of slides because we show them every time. You guys all know that WastewaterSCAN is a national effort based at Stanford, and Marlene and I, who's at Emory, are the program directors and PI and co-PI of WastewaterSCAN, and we work with Verily for laboratory analyses and logistics and data collection. And of course, all of you are local partners, the wastewater treatment plants and public health. Next slide. So we currently work with 147 plants across the United States that serve 12% of the US population, and we work in 40 states. Next slide. And these are the pathogens that we're currently monitoring. So you'll notice this list has changed slightly from December. We've now added Mpox clade 1b, and we had to sunset rotavirus to make room for clade 1b. And we'll be talking more about all of the data that we've collected in the last few weeks, I guess, on clade 1b and our plans for releasing that data publicly in the following slides. I'll go ahead, next slide. All of our protocols and papers are publicly available, and you can access them using the QR codes here if you want more information on our methods. So these are some recent papers that we have to share with you. So we have two new publications listed in the top. One is on pepper mild motile virus biomarker in wastewater, which just came out around the holidays. And then there's the paper on the infectivity and persistence of influenza viruses in raw milk. You can access those on the slides when we send them around. And then we just had a paper accepted that looks at the seasonal occurrence of all the respiratory viruses across the United States, influenza virus, RSV, and human metapneumovirus during last respiratory virus season. And that paper is available for you to look at as well. And we also have a website at the bottom here, which shows all of our publications. We have about 50 now, which you can look at summaries of all of them, so you don't have to read all the papers if you're interested in that. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to go over some of the subtype analysis work for influenza and some of the data that's on our website. So we deployed an updated H1 assay in early December. Remember, we had previously an H1 assay for the H1 subtype of influenza that we had deployed, but new sequences that were deposited to GISAID over the summer showed that the virus had mutated in the region of our assay that it detects. And so we had to use a new assay. And we ended up choosing one that was actually recommended by CDC because our testing in silico and in vitro showed that that assay worked well. And we deployed the new H1 assay on November 29th. And it's important for us to remember that these influenza viruses mutate and evolve very quickly, especially in the HA region of the genome. So we have to consistently check to make sure that the assays are still working. The data on the left here shows data from last respiratory virus season, showing some preliminary work that we did in San Francisco, showing influenza A M gene, which is present in all of the influenza in black, the H1 marker in yellow, and then the H3 and the H5 in blue and red. And this shows that during last influenza season, that H1 was much more common than H3, which is consistent with the clinical data once it was compiled over the season, which showed that H1N1 was the circulating subtype of influenza last respiratory virus season. But that H1 assay that we used in this plot would no longer work currently because of the mutation in the HA gene. Next slide. So if you go to the data.wastewaterscan website and you look at one location, this is Oceanside in San Francisco, you can now look at the concentration of the different influenza markers over time. So this plot shows in orange the influenza A M gene, And you can see that levels have been increasing since early December with the onset of influenza season. And then you can see in purple beneath there is the concentration of the H1 marker. And then in red, you can see H3. And then my screen is cut off, but I think the dark blue is H5. Yeah, there it is. So based on these data, it would suggest that the H1 marker is present in higher concentrations than H3 and H5. And so it would suggest that more people are shedding H1N1 into the wastewater than H3N2. And so we don't have enough clinical data to really tell whether that is what is also reflected in the clinical data, but it's also important to realize that the different subtypes of influenza may cause different severity of illness. So people who actually seek care may be differentially infected with one of the subtypes. So the clinical data may not always match what we observe in wastewater, but we will keep an eye on these data and see if they end up matching what's found through the analysis of clinical samples, which are sequenced, and that takes some time usually. But in the past, we found that the subtype marker analysis from wastewater has matched what has been observed in the clinical samples. Next slide. So I have just a few more slides before I pass it to Marlene. I'm going to talk about the H5 detections across the country. So we've been measuring H5 in wastewater solids since May 2024. And this plot shows spatially across the United States, all of the states where we've detected the H5 marker. So any state that is a dark gray has had at least one positive sample for the H5 marker. And since we started, as of today, we've detected the H5 marker in 768 samples out of over 15,000 samples that we processed. And we've detected it in 16 states at 65 different WastewaterSCAN sites. And the most recent detections have been in California and New Jersey. Next slide. So the concentrations that we've observed in wastewater are actually usually quite low. So this histogram shows the concentrations that we are seeing of the H5 marker in copies per gram. And so our detection limit is about 1,000 copies per gram. And so you can see that like more than 50% of the samples really are right around the detection limit, very low levels. And then there are a handful or more, dozens, that are at very high levels. And so basically our thinking now about the sources of the H5 marker in wastewater is that for these low level detections that we're seeing are probably from discarded dairy products or dietary excretion of the H5 marker through after ingestion of dairy products that contain the H5 RNA. Or when the concentrations are higher, it's from industrial discharges from dairy processing facilities. So that's our current thinking about the sources in wastewater, and members of our group have been doing modeling and additional research to confirm or refute those ideas. And now I'm going to pass it to Marlene.
Sorry, I didn't mean to rush you off stage. Okay, so now we're going to talk about MPOX Clade 1B. So shifting gears a little bit, we're going to talk about the monitoring that we're doing and what our plans are. So we've shared this before, but this table shows the primers and probes that we're currently using for MPOX Clade 1 detection. They're specific to Clade 1B. Amanda is putting information in the chat on that assay reference, and also H5 information. So look for those links in the chat that she just put there. We're utilizing the assay in a probe mixing approach, which is exactly how we do a lot of our assays for wastewater scan testing, so in rocks and ATO 590. So this is the assay and the reference, should you be interested in checking that out in more detail, but it is specific to clade 1B, which is the currently circulating clade 1 that is kind of outbreak concern outside of Central Africa. This is our general workflow for scaling assays that we use for everything that we're looking to test, pilot, and then scale out to all of WastewaterSCAN. And so it's the same process that we always use when we're looking at something new and kind of how we've applied it to MPOX. So we, made the decision with many of you and others to track MPOX clade 1 and come up with an assay that would work. We chose that assay and made sure that it was going to be a good selection, sensitive and specific enough. And we've shared a little bit of information before, and we'll share the document that we have that discusses the methods so that you can see what we've done to make that, make sure that that assay is a good choice. And then now that we've had all the materials, tested the assay specificity and sensitivity in vitro, we scaled MPOX clade 1B testing to all plants on December 16th, all plants in the original SCAN program. So we have those sites that we've been doing testing on since December 16th as a pilot. We sunsetted rotavirus in order to do this. And over the a little bit less than a month now that we've had of doing MPOX clade 1 testing, we have had one positive detection out of 1,600 samples run prospectively. That detection has been discussed extensively with everyone who's involved in that location and all. So, if you were part of that, don't worry. But we've seen that it seems to be working very well. It seems to be sensitive and specific and giving us, we think, helpful information in the real world. And so we're planning for the data to go public on our dashboard next week. On January 15th. I'm like, what is January? January is the first month. Sorry, we have a snow day today, and so my kids are screaming in the other room. So anyway, we scaled. I said just to you know this, we scaled to all the plants. The data is going to go public on January 15th. So all of that data that you already have access to on the stage dashboard will be on the public dashboard on January 15th. And our plan is also to begin submitting the data to news. We have confirmed with them that they're ready to accept that data. And so we are ready to take this to scale and make the data part of our regular dashboard. Sorry for flubbing my words today. Okay, then we have our frequently asked questions about clade 1B. So we have this link here, and Amanda has put it in the chat, all of our kind of information about the FAQs. And then we also have our methods document, which I mentioned before. And so you can see all of the methods. Nothing has changed in how we're doing any of this since we last talked about it, but we've just observed the results over the past month and believe that we're at a point where we're ready to make this part of the kind of publicly available WastewaterSCAN monitoring data. Okay, I'm going to just quickly talk about some ongoing research. And none of this is really very new, but we just want to share with you with what we've got going on in research and development. Again, kind of in the first part of this process that we discussed with MPOX that we use to look at new assays and new approaches. So we've been monitoring parvovirus. That paper is almost complete. There's been a lot of great work done by the team, and so we'll have more to share about parvovirus soon. We've been working on Bordetella pertussis, which is whooping cough, and that is a much earlier stage process. We're still really working on that. It's a little bit tricky. We presented some work a couple months ago on antimicrobial resistance genes, a cross-sectional study across all the sites. And so we have that work is ongoing in preparation for publication. And then we don't have any kind of specific progress to share on this yet, but we're working on looking at methods for metagenomic sequencing of viruses. So we're in the methods development phase for that. We don't have any current plans to add any of these new things to the WastewaterSCAN program at this point, but we're always in a process of looking at what else we can monitor in wastewater and showing proof of concept and looking at opportunities for things that could be in the future monitored in wastewater as part of programs, whether ours or others, for public health impact. Okay, and I'm going to pass it to Amanda to share our latest updates.
Thanks, Marlene. So I'm going to go through things pretty quickly because I want to leave plenty of time for questions at the end. But just a reminder, our categorization is based on levels, trends, and frequency. I just added a link to the chat that'll take you to the methodology for how we calculate based on seasonal pathogens, commonly detected pathogens, and less frequently detected pathogens. Next slide. So I'm going to go through the current categories as of right now if you go on the website. So SARS-CoV-2 is in the high wastewater category, and this is due to high concentrations, but no statistically significant trend in the last 21 days. We currently have 38% of sites in the high wastewater category. Influenza A is now in seasonal onset and is in the high category due to high concentrations, but no statistically significant trend. 83% of sites across the WastewaterSCAN network are now in onset, and 98% of all samples tested in the last 21 days have had a positive detection for influenza A. Influenza B is not quite yet in seasonal onset, although we do have 15 sites that have hit that threshold for onset, and they are mostly in California, and then one in New York, or one in New Jersey, and one in Massachusetts. RSV, we are currently in the high category as well due to high concentrations, but no statistically significant trend in the last 21 days. We have a 95% detection rate for all samples. All regions are in the high category currently, and as the plot in the top right corner shows, we've kind of been steadily increasing concentrations since mid-October. Human metapneumovirus, we are not currently in seasonal onset. We only have about a handful of sites that have hit that threshold, but we will continue to monitor as the respiratory virus season progresses. EVD 68, we are in the low category. As you remember, we were in seasonal onset earlier or at the tail end of 2024. And right now we still have some sites in onset, but all of them are in California, the 18 sites that are still in onset. Neurovirus, we've seen some very high levels of neurovirus in the tail end of 2024 and the beginning of 2025. I'll go into more detail in a couple of slides. Mpox clade 2, we've had all non-detects over the last 21 days. C. auris, we've had only a few positive detections. We've had a 4.5% detection rate in the last 21 days. And then for Hep A, once again, very few positive detections, a 10% detection rate in the last 21 days. Next slide. So here's just a regional overview of where we're at for current SARS-CoV-2 concentrations. The black line is the national average. Then we have Northeast in the green. We have the South in this chartreuse kind of yellow color. The Midwest is in red, and the West is in blue. So we're in the high category currently, and we have a 99% detection rate in all samples. Next slide. And as you can see here, every region except for the South is currently in the high wastewater category. And as I mentioned earlier, 38% of sites are in this high category as we continue into respiratory virus season. Next slide. I want to give a shout out to neurovirus because it is everywhere right now. I'm sure you've seen copious amounts of news articles on neurovirus. So we just wanted to kind of show you how it's matching up with clinical data currently. So the plot on the left is our national aggregate for wastewater concentrations, and then on the right is the neurovirus positivity rate data that was pulled from the CDC earlier this week. The clinical data only goes through the 28th of 2024, so it's about a week or so behind. But as you can see, we've had this steady increase since the mid of October, and that mirrors with what we are seeing in the clinical data. Next slide. And just quickly, here is the regional overview for all of the 4 regions and the national aggregate. As I mentioned, we are currently seeing some of the highest levels we've ever detected. This plot shows the last 2 years of the winter peaks that we have observed. And I think that that's all I have. We want to leave plenty of time for questions. So if you have any questions that we won't get to today, or if you want to send a more detailed description, please use this WastewaterSCAN Stanford Emory listserv, because it will go to Allie, Marlene, Stephen, and myself, and we will be able to answer.
Thanks, Amanda. Raise your hand, speak up, yell, type in the chat, whatever for questions. But I just want to address about the assays for Clade 1 in the chat. Amy clarified what Verily is doing as part of the national contract. And I want to clarify and let everyone know that CDC confirmed with us that they have both targets in their data dictionary. And we have spoken with them about the fact that we have 2 different targets, and we are all on the same page that that is all fine and well and great, and gives us 2 complementary data streams on the same target. And so as we start submitting to them, we'll make sure that those are tagged with the correct target as we submit. And so you'll be able to see those.